looking for, to be
No,
honest.
what in general, I mean, you guys would know from the fuels that I've brought in or purchased from you guys and brought in here. The what we used to see a lot more, probably I would say over the last 10 years, there's been a gradual shift from, C16, Q16, C12, C10. Those were kind of the popular fuels that everybody was using. In the last maybe, I would say 6, 7 years or so is where a lot of people have started to gravitate towards the ethanol and alcohol fuels. A couple of the guys here, the old school guys that used to run, were running on methanol, but those are pretty much outlaw cars. But yeah, as we've seen time go on, and as you guys have seen from the orders, I would say it's over 50% of the people buying racing fuel now are buying the alcohol-based fuels. Partly for cost effectiveness, partly because it's kind of what's the standard that's used in a lot of the classes that people follow the regulations when they do their builds. And it's what the tuners are basically comfortable with, or what we see in our region. Aside from that, as you know as well, we have a couple of people that have been running some of the nitro meth, the 50/50, with good results that way as well too. But I think you can kind of speak a little bit to that more of what would be the benefit of like between M1, M5 and the 50/50. Because from as far as I'm aware, basically the M1 would basically be pure methanol. M5 is 95% methanol, 5% nitro kind of mix. And then your 50/50 is obviously 50% nitro, 50% methanol. On that side of it, am I right in saying that? Or can you give us a little bit more information on that and what the differences are with them really?
Sure. You've asked me a broad spectrum of questions. I'm going to go with the most recent first. The M1 is indeed 99.9 minimum purity methanol. The M5 does contain 95%. The balance at 5% are power making components, which includes some nitromethane. And the 50/50 is in fact 50% nitro, 50% methanol. A couple of things to remember. First, one of the negatives of methanol that I didn't discuss before was it tends to be difficult to breathe, makes your eyes burn, and the old school guys and the door slammers that run the methanol, a lot of guys would put scent in their methanol, which made it easier to live inside the car and be able to breathe. I don't recommend the scents because it just makes something that's not good to breathe easier to breathe. The 5% methanol M5 is a very nice little power boost. Nitromethane is such a good oxygenate. It produces or releases, I should say, so much oxygen. You could actually run an underwater engine on nitromethane because it releases so much oxygen that it can keep running. So let's talk about that reactor, the combustion chamber. I like to say, to make horsepower, you need air, fuel, spark, and I oftentimes add money. So it's easy to put more fuel into the motor, generally speaking. A bigger injector, more fuel pumps, so on and so forth. But in order for the engine to run properly, you need corresponding or correct amount of air. And that's the hard part, getting the extra air in there. It could be with camshafts, it can be with valves, it can be with bigger displacement, turbocharging, supercharging, and chemical supercharging. And that's where products like the nitromethane and the Q16 that you mentioned before give a racer an advantage. Because when you can bring in a component with the fuel that can release oxygen, now, as long as you have the spark and the dollars to pay for the engine failures when
For
you
the
push the
potential
limits,
destruction.
you can make horsepower. One of the reasons that the nitro cars in recent years have gotten so much faster is the ignition systems as well as the components to tolerate these extreme cylinder pressures. But if you put 50% nitromethane in a stock car, first of all, 50%, generally more than about 3%, won't mix or stay suspended in a typical fuel. Methanol, obviously, you can suspend greater portions of nitromethane, but as you get into the greater percentages, you have to have the ignition system that can ignite it. So you had asked me earlier about running C85. C85 is a great choice for a car that's set up to run ethanol or methanol. You've got the bigger injectors. You're able to run in those, your components are set up to run the extreme temperatures and extreme cylinder pressures. And C85 is essentially the minimum amount of ethanol to call it an 85% and the maximum amount of power components in that additional 15%, which include nitromethane and our unleaded fuels, the C9 to be precise. So I might have gotten so far afield that I didn't respond to your earlier question about the Q16 and the C16. Again, a lot of the race cars now, unless they are, as you referred to earlier, the old school guys and cars, which I resemble, all of the new stuff is unleaded. The combustion chambers are better. You don't need the higher octanes that we used to use in those earlier combustion chambers. We've got the electronic controls. We've got injection systems. We've got direct injection systems that have made a huge difference. The bigger ignition systems, all of those things have contributed to reduce the need for octane in these motors. And so as a company, I'm not selling as much of the leaded product that I used to. And in fact, even at my racetracks, some of the tracks, we've had to reverse the tanks. So the big tanks that used to contain the 110 and the C12, we need that for the 100 octane and the C9 and the smaller tanks for the leaded fuels.
So I guess similarly to what Paul is saying, I mean, there's been a change in the landscape of motorsports altogether, particularly, I guess, for maybe drag racing for us and the different motorsports that you guys participated in on your end too. So it's good to see.
GI motors don't need much octane at all unless they are extremely modified.
Those are like the newer engines, the GDI, the direct injection.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like the newest Civics, like Dario, all of that.
Yeah.
Much like the rotary engines in the Mazda. Now, there are benefits to using race fuel, but again, in those cases, you want to use fuels that have a lower octane number, but a good energy or BTU value.